Imagine you're a student athlete at one of the Big Five conferences. Say you play a sport with massive national television attention, and you're on ESPN regularly. First of all, what? You're between the ages of 18 and 22 and on a massive platform in the world of sports? Aside from being a god on your own campus, people across the entire nation know your name. How freaking awesome is that? But can you imagine the immense amount of pressure you're under 24/7? How can you possibly think of school at a time like that? Well, at a Big Five conference, you really wouldn't need to. See, they take care of you by enrolling you in classes that don't require you to do actual work or classes that don't really exist, which is great for your athletic career. But what if you don't go to the next level in your respective sport? What if you don't go professional? Where does that leave you in life with no actual preparation to the real world? The New York Times editorial entitled "The Fraud of the Student-Athlete Claim" discusses the lawsuit that two former student-athletes from the University of North Carolina filed against their alma mater. The premise of this editorial is very enlightening, but I think they could have gone a lot farther with the evidence presented. The Fraud of the Student-Athlete Claim made the claim that the NCAA should recognize that some players are essentially professionals. Now, while I do agree with this statement, I do not believe the editorial went far enough with its evidence to show that the NCAA is depriving its student-athletes of their student status. The editorial attempted to use ethos in order to appeal to the reader's emotions, and I think that's very difficult to do with this subject because not all cases are the same. The editorial made the connection between a swimmer and a quarterback at a Big Five conference. The swimmer might be able to split their time between the pool and the library, but a quarterback probably couldn't do that. A quarterback at a Big Five conference is essentially an unpaid professional. He generates money for his coaches, his school, his conference, everyone except himself, and he is expected to practice up to 50 hours a week during the football season, even though there is a 20-hour rule in effect throughout all NCAA schools. Now, there are some college athletes that should be considered professionals, as the editorial suggests. However, that is not true for all athletes, or even all colleges. The Big Five conferences require much more time and commitment from their student athletes than other conferences, like Conference USA or the Sun Belt Conference. Beyond that, I believe the Big Five really only want that full-time, balls-to-the-wall commitment from only a few of their major sports, the ones that generate the most revenue. As of last September of 2014, the university that generated the most revenue from athletics was the University of Texas. Now, how much more pressure do you think that football players at UT are under than the football players at, say, Louisiana Lafayette? Now, I mentioned before the 20-hour rule. The 20-hour rule states that the student athletes may engage in countable athletic-related activities for only 4 hours a day and no more than 20 hours a week during the season, and 8 hours a week the rest of the year. The New York Times editorial did touch on the subject of how much student athletes actually practice, but not nearly enough. According to CNN, football players at Northwestern University went to the National Labor Relations Board in an attempt to unionize. It was uncovered that during the season, athletes devoted 50 hours a week to their sport. That is well above the 20-hour rule. The commissioner of the Big 12, Bob Bowlsky, was quoted in 2013 saying, "The 20-hour rule is a joke because there were too many exemptions and too many falsification of records." Among the activities that do not count towards the 20-hour rule are voluntary workouts, voluntary sports-related activities with no coach present, recruitment activities, traveling to competitions, training room activities, rehabilitation, medical exams, and public appearances. Clearly, Bob Bowlsby had a point. If the NCAA is not truly enforcing the 20-hour rule, what is the point? Some of you may remember the first ever NCAA football playoffs this past season where Ohio State took over and won the first ever true national championship game with their third-string quarterback, Cardale Jones. Cardale Jones famously tweeted, quote, Why should we go to school if we came here to play football? We ain't come here to play school. Classes are pointless. Now, if he's thinking that way, I'm sure that other student athletes are too. Now, these student athletes take their sports very seriously, and most of them have the unrealistic intention of playing professionally. Now, I say unrealistically because the percentage of college athletes in any sport entering the draft of their respective sports is far lower than the amount of the college athletes. According to Business Insider, baseball is the only sport that has more than 2% of NCAA players playing professionally. Football only has 1.7% of college players playing professionally, basketball has 1.2%, and baseball has an astounding 11.6% of college players playing professionally. Now, with the incredibly low percentage of college athletes actually playing their respective sports on the professional level, why is school not more important to them and to the NCAA as a whole? Furthermore, the NCAA has recently granted the Big Five conferences permission to pay their student athletes a stipend. According to ESPN.com, a college athletics panel comprised of 15 college athletes and the 65 schools of the football-driven leagues passed legislation to allow the Big Five conferences to pay their students a cost of attendance stipend. Depending on the institutions, the stipends have been estimated to be between $2,000 and $4,000. That will account for cost of living, and that's in addition to their own scholarships. See, this is a slippery slope. If we start to pay our college athletes, what is the difference between them and professional athletes? How can we possibly tell them that school is more important than their sport? And while I do agree with the editorial's claim the NCAA should recognize that some players are essentially professionals, I do not believe they took the matter far enough. These student athletes have one thing in mind, and that is not their college education. The 20-hour rule is a joke. These players are being treated as professionals and still expected to thrive in college. Less than 2% of the student athletes will play professionally, and they are now receiving money for playing their respective sports. If the Big Five conferences start paying their student athletes a stipend, what motivation do they have to work harder in school? Their motivation will lie solely on their athletic career, when the likelihood of those student athletes making a professional career out of their sports is less than 2%. The editorial did not stress nearly enough how desperately our college athletics programs need to be more balanced. Thank you. I have been wonderful.